Hello and welcome to our sixth live stream, I think. Yeah. So what started off as an experiment that I had done with my close friend and ex-colleague almost, Yusuf, has turned into a very interesting and a very warmly received, weekly event. So I can see a lot of people are already joining in. So I'll probably introduce myself and my agency for the next couple of minutes so that everyone can log in, and then we'll move on to our speaker and the topic for today. So so a couple of things. Yeah. So my name is Rahul, and I'm the chief consultant and the founder of Decode Strategy Labs. And Decode Strategy Labs is, my baby that I started smack in the middle of the pandemic. And on one side, I provide consulting services where anything from marketing, brand, and advertising kind of consulting services. So that's one side of the work I do. On the other side, I've been helping out a lot of agencies, brands, as well as some startups to build their awards agenda and try and get themselves recognized for the hard work and the achievements that they make and win some awards. And on the third side, I am also running a marketing academy where I provide a course in strategic marketing. And this is a course where I have put in 15 years of my experience of working with a lot of different marketers across different brands, across different markets. And it starts all the way from basic fundamentals in marketing. So the first two modules are pretty much things which are never taught anywhere in any of the courses. And then I move more into the core marketing strategy elements, the segmentation, targeting, positioning, and then going into the details of pricing, distribution, new product, and as such. So it's something which is very interesting. I'm extremely thankful to all the students who are already doing this course, and really happy to hear all the feedback. So it's very helpful. So apart from this, I just wanted to let you guys know that there are some fascinating live streams coming up. And next week, we've got Professor Dholakia, who will be talking about pricing. He's probably one of the biggest authorities around the world when it comes to pricing. And if you haven't registered for the event, you should. After which, we have Maya from Space Doctors. And she's done some fascinating work around packaging, which tends to be like an area where marketers are really interested and they want to adopt it in a good way, but they don't know where to start and how to do it in a culturally meaningful way. And if you are a marketer in that kind of a dilemma, this is a must attend talk for you. And lastly, there's this talk coming up with Amit, and Amit, he currently heads the distribution side in ABNB, AB and Bev, and he'll be talking about the distribution lessons that he's heard, like he's learned the very hard way in the last 10 years. And we were having a conversation, and he spoke about how he wished some of these things were coded and someone had taught these things to him early on in his career. But nevertheless, he's learned it, and he's extremely keen to share with everyone. So those are some of the upcoming events. And the one thing which you must do is you must go and follow the Decode Strategy Labs page on LinkedIn, because it's increasingly harder and harder for me to send out invitations to a ton of people. And you know how platforms don't give you the amount of organic reach, especially when it's event announcements and all. So that's one way to stay updated with all the upcoming events. So follow the LinkedIn page, the Decode Strategy Labs LinkedIn page. And after this live stream, just go on to LinkedIn where you had registered for the event, and you can find that page there. And on the other side, you must follow the YouTube page as well. So I've been running this Business of Marketing channel on YouTube, and if you haven't subscribed, you should. In fact, earlier this week, I had sent out an appeal saying that, I've spent more than 2,000 hours of effort has gone into creating the content on this channel, and I don't have 1,000 subscribers to show for it. And in response to that, a lot of you have not just subscribed, and you've also sent me best wishes. You've also sent me suggestions on what else you would want to see, and I received a lot of feedback on the live streams that I have started doing recently. So thank you so much to everyone, and thank you to everyone who is watching the live stream today. Lastly, we'll move in to the core part of today's conversation, which is how inspiring strategy and innovation through cultural insights, which Adri will be talking about. Before I add Adri into the conversation, just one thing I wanted to remind you is that if you have any questions during the session, please put them in the comment section. If you're watching it on LinkedIn or if you're watching it on YouTube, just put your questions in the comment section below. And the moment you send those questions, they will start appearing on our screen over here, and we'll be able to take those questions and respond to those questions as we go along with the show. So on that note, I would like to welcome Adri. Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. So good to finally make this happen. What started off as trying to track you down to finding out that you're in Bali, to finally us having that conversation and arriving at the topic, which I think is very close to your heart. So I just wanted to say one thing before I hand over to you and ask you to introduce yourself. I think the reason why I really wanted to have Adri come and join me in the live stream at some point is because there was this project that we were working closely with for Kraft Heinz in Indonesia. And Adri did some fabulous piece of work where he went and he spoke to experts and he tried to decode what was happening. And those insights were the ones which led to a completely change, a full-on 180-degree turn almost in what the brand had been, the way the brand had been approaching things. And it's never looked back since then. So it's probably, I'm thankful, you were one of the people who helped create one of the pieces of work that I'm probably most proud of. Thanks a ton. So on that note, Adri, why don't you start? Why don't you tell us about yourself, your agency, and then we can continue from there.
Sure. So I'm just going to share my screen now, but thank you so much, Raul, for inviting me to speak here. And also thanks for everyone if you're tuning in. It's a Saturday afternoon, so I'm flattered that you've decided to join. Today I'm going to be talking about cultural insights, and essentially I'm going to be talking about my profession. And it's a job that I really enjoy, and a profession that came quite naturally to me. So a bit about myself. I come from a multicultural background. My mom is French, my dad Indonesian, and then we've kind of moved around a lot. When I was little, we moved from Indonesia to the US, and then we lived in Brussels for a few years. And that kind of gave me this kind of this bug to always move around and experience different things. So I've studied and I worked a few years in France, and then moved to Australia, and then previously and after that I went to Singapore for a few years, and all of that kind of accumulated working from different agencies before I set up my own firm called Nation. So Nation is a cultural insights and strategy agency. And I think what's unique about us is we're a bit of a hybrid agency in the sense that Our team is composed of a very eclectic group of people. We have traditional researchers. We've got strategic planners and brand planners, and we've got a few industrial designers. And all of these people working as one team to help clients develop product ideas, develop brand strategies. But the foundation of all of that is our understanding of people and culture. Our specialism really is in Southeast Asia, and that's why we have 2 offices right now in Singapore and in Jakarta. So most of our work happens in places like Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, and we also do sometimes work in India and some in North Asia, but mostly in Southeast Asia. Cool. So some examples of the clients that we've been working with. These are, I guess 70% of our work is with these clients right here. So half of our clients are tech companies like Google, a local tech company in Indonesia, Gojek. We do a lot of work with Spotify, and we do a lot of work around fintech for banks or for tech companies. And the other half is with consumer goods companies. So a nice range from booze to food and personal care, and even some chocolate. So quite varied. And thankfully, all of these clients are in need of cultural insights to fuel their brand, their communications, their innovation process. So we really specialize in 2 main areas. Through research, our work informs brand and communication. So we do a lot of work around building segmentations, helping clients develop culturally relevant positioning. We help a lot with communications, especially early creative development. And then the other part of our work is around design research or product development / innovation. And that tends to be more upstream work, which is identifying opportunities or kind of problems we can solve through technology and that kind of thing, new product development. And also we do a bit of futures work, which is looking into signals of future shifts to identify future opportunities. But most of our work is, as I said, quite strategic, and upstream is quite exploratory, and therefore we use a lot of qualitative research and cultural analysis for this. Our process is quite straightforward. We always start our process with research, with understanding people and culture through various methodologies. We then distill that into insight and strategy, and our output tends to be ideas and concepts. Now, from a approach perspective, we always approach our clients' problems through 2 lenses. The first one is through the perspective of people, and this requires what we call empathy. A lot of research actually is very much focused on empathy and looking close and deep. You'll see a lot of research briefs from clients like dig deep or understand the consumers in depth. And that primarily uses methods like qualitative research. So everything from observing, immersing, discussing. But the other very important part of inspiring strategy and innovation is to add a visionary element to the thinking, which is more around society and culture. So other than looking close and deep, we also tend to approach briefs by looking wide and into the future, especially if you want to build ideas that will sustain over time. And a lot of this requires an understanding of the macro context, whether it's political, economic, technological, etc., and how these things are affecting humans and society. But also we analyze discourses, we interview experts, and employ from time to time semiotics. So before I start talking about cultural insights, I just wanted to align with our understanding, our definition of culture. And when we talk about culture, it's such a big word. And when we talk about culture, usually it's not just cultural artifacts. So museums, paintings, rituals, objects, places, events, and so forth. These are all part of culture, and I guess they're manifestations or cultural products in a sense. But really, when we're talking about culture from an insights perspective, what we're really thinking about and exploring are the shared ideas and beliefs in society. And typically, we would separate and distinguish them into two types. The first one being enduring culture. So these are ideas and beliefs that have endured over time and that are characteristic of a nation, of a people. And typically that comes in the form of tradition and that kind of thing. But there's also evolving culture. This is part of culture that constantly shifts and moves. And these tend to be conversations in society around the same beliefs and ideas that constantly evolve as our context evolve. And this is often talked about as macro trends and that kind of thing. So again, culture, when we're talking about cultural insights, is about shared ideas and beliefs. And it's as much the enduring ideas and beliefs as with evolving culture. So I'll kind of talk about them through the work and through the examples I share, kind of both of them. I wanted to start off, especially because I know there's a lot of marketers and brand practitioners here, but I love this quote from an article that Charles Wigley, he used to be the chairman of BBH Asia Pacific. He wrote this in an article, and I thought it really captured this idea of cultural insights well. But he said the freshness of great brands comes from new zeitgeist-inspired interpretations of old, consistent themes. And his argument is that you don't necessarily need to refresh and revamp the brand and change its positioning all the time. The idea was that, stick to your brand positioning and purpose, but it's always important to look at how it manifests across different times, different generations, and apply it to an understanding of the spirit of the time. And that's very much what I'm going to be talking about today. I wanted to start off with an example that I thought was really powerful. And this example is from a brand that I really love, actually. It's Nike. I'm sure you all know Nike. And if you think about Nike, and if you're familiar with the work, the ads, the way the brand was portrayed in the 90s until the early 2000s, Nike was very much about, their brand purpose or their motto is about, if you have a body, you can be an athlete. And that was really portrayed through their work. Sorry. Here in the early 2000s, they were really portraying this purpose through winners, athletes, brand ambassadors, and portraying them almost as demigods. And as you can see in these ads, even Cristiano Ronaldo in the form of a statue. And the ads were about glorifying these athletes as the absolute, powerful, dominant winners. But something interesting happened in the late 2000s. In 2008, we saw the fall of, the kind of the financial system, with initially triggered by the fall of Lehman Brothers, and the global financial crisis started. And in this time, there were various movements in society, like the Occupy Wall Street movement. And this was very much about, glorifying the 99%, all of us who are not in power. And I think in this time, there was almost like a distaste towards people in power and a desire to regain power for the 99%. And this was an interesting social context for brands like Nike, who had always glorified the winner, who had always talked about dominance. And actually, this movement triggered many different changes in our society, and that was apparent in various categories. One obvious one is that we saw the re-emergence of minimalism. So this move from opulence towards a much more minimalist, clean, understated look. And that was everything from architecture, design, pack design, fashion, and so forth. As you can see here, even until recently, this is a trend triggered around that time that continues to be quite prevalent in pack design, in fashion, kind of the normcore fashion, and as actually there's been I think fatigue around this aesthetic, this kind of minimalist, clean, almost homogeneous aesthetic. But it lasted for very, very long, and it was very much triggered, I think, by that kind of social trigger around the global financial crisis. Ironically, it's not that people at the time wanted to stop buying expensive and premium goods or to assert status. But as you can see here, there was this trend at the time where people were buying luxury cars, but painted them in this muted black. So it's kind of like, I don't know if it's understated luxury or I don't know how to call it, but it was such an interesting manifestation of the time. Now, going back to Nike, in that same year, or very quickly after, Nike saw their shares drop significantly. Their profits drops and their sales drops. And there was there seemed to be a correlation with what was going on in society and culture and the relevance of their brand, and it showed up very clearly in their sales. Around the same time, you saw brands like Under Armour thriving. So people weren't necessarily stopping buying apparel. People were still buying apparel, but they were just buying brands that were more resonant with the times. And brands like Under Armour, who, in contrast to Nike, it was very much about glorifying the underdog and the process, the journey, the hustle. And you saw that in so many different aspects, even of sports, where you saw the emergence of things like, CrossFit being popularized many years after that, compared to like the flashy gyms. Even in basketball, I'm really into basketball, and around that time, it was a shift from the very kind of aggressive slam dunk to the 3-point shot. So in many ways, this kind of aggressive dominance was replaced with the hustle, the journey, and almost a much more humble approach to sports. So what did Nike do? I mean, obviously their whole purpose was around, becoming an athlete or enabling you to become an athlete. And they had built this, aura, this image around dominance. And they pivoted completely into, from glorifying the winner to glorifying the journey towards greatness. And this was several years later. And I just wanted to show this video just to give you a sense of how much they pivoted from their initial kind of communication. So no bright lights, great athletes and so forth, but very much talking about the journey and the effort to become a winner and finding your greatness. So the challenge here, I think, for marketers especially, is that very often these important shifts that will have a massive impact on your brand and the relevance of your brand, they don't immediately or fully reveal themselves in focus groups and in conversations with consumers. Very often these signals become very apparent and need to be read through context and culture. And this is really the crux of what I want to talk about today, is how we can be better at being attuned to what's going on in society, understanding people's context and culture to fuel brand strategy and innovation. And I think for this audience right here, because I know a lot of you joining are from Asia, and having done research and having lived and worked in the area of research across many countries from Europe to Australia and Asia, I can tell you for certain that understanding context and culture is particularly pertinent in Asia. Our Asian context is, especially Southeast Asia, it's a high context culture. It's very collective, and meaning that behaviors tend to be quite homogenous and kind of dictated by what is considered as the norms in society versus individual will. And that has a very long history, even from Asian philosophy compared to Western philosophy. And therefore, when you run a focus group, for example, in Europe or the US or Australia versus in Southeast Asia, you'll see there's a lot of agreement. And people tend to do things as a result of the social dynamics around them or the cultural norms, as opposed to this is my individual will. So this is absolutely pertinent. And if you're doing research in Southeast Asia, there absolutely needs to be a layer of understanding context and culture beyond understanding the individual. So I wanted to share a framework that we often use in our team, and just to explain to you what we mean by cultural insight in practical terms. So when you're studying a theme or a topic, usually we look at multiple layers. So cultural insight is not about cool hunting or trend spotting. It's really a purposeful exploration of two big things. The first is cultural shifts, and the second is context. Sorry, it should be context first and then cultural shifts. So if you look at the middle part, this is often what is researched, is people, their private and intimate, their thoughts, their aspirations, their motivations, etc. There's a lot of research around the individual behavior, how they use products and so forth. But equally important is their context, their physical environment, their home, their neighborhood, their physical context, their work, their social environment, their friends, the social dynamics with family, extended family, their mother, father-in-law, etc. And more broadly, culture and society. These are the values and ideals in society. And all of that actually trickles down and affects how the individual responds and consumes things and feels. So from a research perspective, this actually requires different methodologies, and all of our work always includes speaking to people, observing them. So I'm not kind of undermining the importance of the private, intimate, and behaviors, but other than interviews, discussions, observing, etc., it's always very important to understand their environment, and that's done through immersing, through visiting these places, feeling, kind of experiencing what your consumers are experiencing in their natural context. So we do that through a lot of ethnographic immersion and a lot of reading to understand culture and society. So reading, how, for example, femininity or masculinity is portrayed in society and talked about, what is good versus bad, what is rich versus poor, what is successful, unsuccessful. So these are all things that is very difficult for consumers to articulate, and you have to observe and read and immerse. So this is a very summarized view of, I won't go in depth on methodology, but I think this is a useful framework when you're looking at either a brand purpose, a topic, whatever research or question you have. I would always look at it through these layers, and your inquiry should use these multiple layers in order to gain a holistic view. So we've talked a lot about brand and how you can use cultural insights for brand strategy, like in the example of Nike. But I also wanted to show you this view of cultural meaning and cultural insights applied in innovation. And apologies for this kind of not so pretty graph, but this is super interesting because this is based on a journal that a guy called Roberto Verganti, who's a scholar in design and design thinking, and also Donald Norman, who in the 90s, he was one of the first Apple fellows and really driving their thinking around user experience. But essentially their argument was that, there's a lot of talk now around human-centered design and as one application of design thinking. But in innovation, human-centered design, they argue, is when you're looking at small behaviors and frictions and pain points in the way people use products, etc., and trying to solve them, that will lead to primarily incremental innovation and small product improvements. But so kind of illustrated as this hill, you go up the hill, but eventually your category will be so evolved and so fine-tuned that there is no more meaningful innovation to do. And in these cases, they argue that you need to innovate based on shifts in meaning. So how the meaning of money has evolved, how the meaning of transportation has evolved, how the meaning of caring for your body has evolved. And meaning-led innovation is what will help you jump to another hill, and then you start all over again with human-centered design to start innovating and optimizing in more incremental ways. So yeah, this is just to give you an example of applications of cultural insights and using cultural meaning for both brand strategy and also for innovation. And it's particularly useful when you want to develop big ideas, when you want to make big leaps in innovation. Right. So I've talked to you a lot about the theory and the thinking behind cultural insights and its applications, but I think for it to be more useful, I actually want to share some of the work that our team has been doing and applying cultural insights for our clients. I'm going to show you, I think, about 4 or 5 case studies. And these are case studies that are probably about at least 2-3 years old. For confidentiality reasons, obviously, I'm going to show you stuff that's already been launched and that we've worked on. The first one is innovation work that we did with Google, and this was to inform the launch of what's called Google Go. I don't know if you all are familiar with this, but the brief from Google is, the background was that search being like Google search being their cash cow was really, I guess, struggling to grow in emerging markets, what they call the next billion user. And this was really where growth would come from, places like India, Indonesia, Brazil. And in these countries, people weren't using search as much as more developed markets. And so they wanted to understand why and whether they could redesign Google search, even for the most extreme users, which are new internet users or new mobile phone users in rural areas. And so the work that we did several things. One is we did an ethnographic diary of every time these people consumed information. We asked them to whisper in an audio recorder. So when, where, with whom, what information, and what source. And that could be anything from asking for like fertilizer prices at the market, or asking about like your child's school schedule from a teacher or anything like that. And secondly, we spent about 2 weeks in these in several kind of villages, just to really understand how information is consumed in these areas. We also spoke to experts, anthropologists, and so forth. But really the key insights was that the key cultural insight came from understanding context. So the big insight was people don't consume information and acquire information through text. There were no books, no magazines around, and there was very little written word, and people were not writing. So you can imagine for someone like that, the Google search bar is extremely intimidating, especially what we call syntax search or using keywords. It was something that was unfathomable for a lot of people who consume primarily their information through visual means or through verbal means. And all of those insights led to the development of Google Go. So after that research, we spent a week sprint with several designers and developers from the Google team, and we spent a week in a rural area in central Java in Indonesia. And this was launched as Google Go in India and Indonesia and beyond. But really the Google search was redesigned with that user in mind, very visual, using tabs. And also when you were using text through this app, there were a lot of predictive text, much more than you and I would experience in the normal Google search. So that's example number one. Another example I wanted to show you was work that we've done with Spotify. And this was an interesting example because we used cultural insights to inform a pricing strategy. The background to this study was that Spotify, their business model and the way they monetized from the start was using the monthly premium plan, where you pay a certain amount upfront and you're able to use it, continually for a month. And they were struggling to drive penetration in less developed markets, like in Southeast Asia. Interestingly, they had launched the daily and weekly premium plans. And what they had seen in their data was that people were buying these daily, weekly plans continuously. So that people would buy, 3 days in a row or 2-3 weeks in a row. And it didn't make sense because in the end, it becomes more expensive than buying 1 month. And therefore, they wanted to understand what to do with this and how they can actually drive growth through different pricing plans. And so really what we did was we did an immersion there were 14 Spotify researchers and marketers who came to this part of the world. And we took them around to actually immerse in how different adjacent categories were selling to people, and it was everything from FMCG to technology, transport, etc. How payments were being made, and more specifically, the notion of value. The big cultural insight, which I'm sure you're all familiar with if you're from Asia or Southeast Asia, is that in Southeast Asia, cash flow is everything. The context here is much more uncertain. Social security is almost inexistent. Incomes are very often daily or weekly, and so forth. And therefore, people don't really want to spend up front. They'd rather spend more, but in small bits. And this insight was so kind of required such a paradigm shift for the Spotify team that they asked us to create an exhibition in their headquarters in Stockholm, so people over there could actually understand, why the hell, someone would buy and pay more in small bits rather than getting better value in a monthly plan, and just explaining the kind of not just the cultural context, but the infrastructural context, the employment context that led to what we call bite-sized life. This was quite revealing for them, that actually now they've completely taken on this new paradigm shift, and actually launched even a campaign which was all about smaller is better. As you can imagine, that's quite a big shift from convincing people to buy the big monthly plan. So that's my second example of cultural insights in pricing strategy. My third example is also quite a fun example, and I'm sure a lot of you here, have worked or with Unilever or at Unilever, and one of their brands is called Royco in Indonesia. It's actually Nor, but the background here was that the proposition of Nor, in short, is about superior taste. And I think the way in which superior taste was expressed throughout multiple campaigns had become a bit stale. And I think the team was struggling to find new, fresh angles on how can you actually portray and talk about superior taste. And that was really the challenge for us. And often when you speak to consumers, when you ask, what is superior taste, they'll often say, well, just put it in your mouth, and if it tastes good, that's superior taste. But that was the struggle, I guess. And so what we did, we started the study with looking at what were the nuances around superior taste, and we studied. We spoke to chefs. We studied recipe books. And we basically scraped the internet for all of the different ways in which superior taste was talked about. And actually, we found a ton of angles that hadn't been explored by our clients, over 20 claims around superior taste. So everything from superior taste coming from better quality ingredients, superior taste coming from, the way you cook the ingredients or the mix, the recipe, or often, we saw in, restaurants or adjacent categories, or in recipe books, it was very much about who was cooking, and often if it's an old lady cooking it, usually it's gonna taste better. So we uncovered a ton of new angles on this notion of superior taste, and these were turned into concepts and claims that we then tested with consumers. So kind of working from cultural insights and then testing them with consumers. This was, I guess, so useful for the Nor team that all of these angles were crystallized in what we created, a glossary of superior taste. So we created a small booklet that their team and their agencies could use to refresh and revamp the way they talk about superior taste over the years. I think I have one or two final examples. Gojek here is one of our main clients in Indonesia, and I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're the biggest tech company now in Indonesia. Their ambitions to become a super app, and they came to us, I don't know, about 5-6 years since they started up, and they grew so fast, and they expanded their portfolio of products exponentially, from online transport to food to payments, paying bills, even massages, etc. And I think what had happened is that they've grown so fast and expanded their portfolio so fast that all of these brands or sub-brands had become, brands in their own right, but they were communicating in different ways. So the food business, GoFood, was talking about discovery, exploration, but transport was talking about convenience, reliability, and so forth. So there was a real risk that the brand would become quite ambiguous. Meanwhile, the brand architecture was very much a branded house. So it did require some kind of consistency in the way the brand was speaking and in their purpose. So a lot of our work involved understanding. Our starting point actually was the founder's vision, and their goal from the start was about solving life's inefficiencies. So our whole study was about understanding the meaning of efficiency versus inefficiency. And we studied, we did desk research, literature reviews on, even press reviews on how the government was talking about efficiency versus inefficiency, how it was talked about in the corporate context. And we also did research with consumers and users, who were telling us about aspects of their life that felt efficient and inefficient. And the big insight was that we found this really interesting cultural insight, that people were always looking for efficiencies in a very inefficient context. And that required finding workarounds, especially if you're in Southeast Asia. Often infrastructure and public services are quite poor. And so really the essence was to find, ngakalin culture. And I think in India it's called jugad. You find similar terms in like Brazil and other, kind of developing countries, where people have to find workarounds to get to work more quickly, to get food delivered, and so forth, amidst kind of this challenging context. And so this whole cultural insight became the basis of their new positioning, which internally is called Hack Life. This was a new purpose that reflected Gojek's evolution beyond online transport, that they could really use as the basis for their whole portfolio and trickle down onto their sub-brands. I wanted to show you like how they implemented it in the relaunch, in the campaign of their new brand strategy. First through the logo, and then they ran this TV campaign. Just stories around how people were hacking and finding workarounds, clever workarounds. Just gonna play it a bit. But yeah, so you get the gist of it. It's basically being really clever and finding workarounds. And Gojek, in a sense, is the equivalent of these clever hacks to get through life. One last one I wanted to share with you guys is the final slide, and really interesting work that we did with Diageo a few years ago, and is working for their premium whiskey brands. Actually, internally they call it super premium, I think. And they had done a lot of work around, Diageo usually positions their brand around need states, and they know that the dominant need state for premium whiskey is around status. But actually, all brands or premium brands, and especially premium whiskey brands, work in this motivational space called status, which is basically consuming to assert your status or your dominance. But they really wanted to understand, interesting nuances and interesting angles on how they could own a space within status that would be distinctive. And so what we did is we spent a lot of time in bars and immersing in the dynamics of people drinking premium whiskey. And actually we found multiple angles, and all of them were actually rooted in culture and history. And this was Indonesia. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each. So under status, there were three big narratives. The first one was what we called the king and his people. And usually it's a dominant guy who's buying an expensive drink for his like underlings or staff. And, this is very much about the king and his people. And this is really rooted in the culture of Bapaism, or it's basically fatherism, which is very common in Indonesian corporate culture and politics. The second narrative, what we saw was that a lot of the times people were actually buying drinks for the king or the dominant person. And often this was staff who were buying together for their boss. Or if you wanted to get a business favor, you would buy, like some person a drink. And this was very much about serving the king. And this had roots in upeti culture, or basically offerings. And this goes back hundreds of years, where, people would give offerings in order to get favors. And the third narrative is what we call among kings. And this was multiple kings within the same table, but celebrating their dominance. And this was very much about asserting dominance versus the next table. So as you can see here, through this cultural immersion, we were able to find various very interesting angles on the status need state. And this could be implemented not just in communications, but also in how the drink is served, the pour, how service staff, kind of build an experience around the brand. Yeah, so that was my last example, and I wanted to finish off with just 3 things that I thought would be good for you to take out around cultural insights. The first one, again, I'm stealing from Charles Wigley, but I really love this idea of using old consistent themes, but interpreting them through the new zeitgeist or the spirit of the times. The second one is that big shifts are often found beyond things consumers say. So I would always encourage you, if you're looking for meaningful cultural insights, look for context, understand the broader cultural context and broader cultural shifts. And then finally, meaning often. So looking, understanding, especially in innovation, understanding how the meaning of things is shifting compared to just looking at small frictions and small tension is much more powerful as a catalyst for disruptive innovation. And actually, this is kind of a prelude to one of the talks that Raul will have with Maya, I think, which is all about meaning and understanding cultural meaning. So if you want to know more about cultural meaning and cultural codes, you should definitely check out Maya's talk. Yeah, so that's it for me. Plugging in our Instagram account. Do follow, and like we share some of our work and our thinking on there. But yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them.
Awesome. So thanks a ton, Adri. And I think I'll plug in, once again. I mentioned this at the beginning, but I think I need to plug it again and again. That if you aren't already following the Decode Strategy Labs LinkedIn page, you should absolutely do this now. And if you want to watch the recordings, I understand, like I'm trying to catch time zones all the way from, UK, where it's 9 a.m. To Sydney. But pretty much every talk I've seen an audience which goes, which spreads more than 30 plus countries. And then there is people showing up from Canada, United States, even from Brazil. And it's almost impossible for everyone to, watch it live. And I know it's a convenient time for us in, for you in Bali, for me in Singapore, the evening starts, and for you and for people in India just after lunch, before you take that nap. But for others, it would be great if you subscribe to the YouTube channel. And I'm going to continue, to appeal till I get to that 1,000 subscriber mark. So yes, so absolutely fabulous, presentation. Thanks a ton, Adri, for sharing some really, really powerful pieces of work. And when you share the theory of it, it's great. But when you actually look at the theory being applied in the real work, that's where it becomes so much more powerful. So it's not just an academic approach for the sake of it, but there is merit and there is a lot of beauty which is unlocked when done properly. So at this point, I just wanted to remind the viewers that this is a good time to post your questions on LinkedIn or YouTube, and we'll try and answer as many as we can. Adri, I would like to start with one or two questions that I had myself, and the first one is actually coming more from the perspective of the kind of viewers that I know are watching this. And we have a huge audience base which comes from the startup world, from the, a lot of founders who are almost bootstrapping and trying to work with really lean structures and making, ends meet. And and they are trying to figure out, how do you go about in doing meaningful work, and I have seen a lot of them having interest in finding, in marrying their products with culturally rooted insights, and really interested in speaking to people and trying to design technology in an extremely human-centered way. But I'm trying to understand from you that what's the process internally like, what were you guys as a team going through, and what would you do, say, in a project like, the Spotify project, or say the YouTube project? What
Yeah.
happens in the background, and if there are lessons from that, like, how often do you guys go out, and when do you come back, and what do you do, so that for someone who is actually trying to bootstrap, there are a couple of interesting things which you are applying in the back end, which not everyone gets to see, that they can take advantage of and maybe apply themselves.
Mm. Yeah, I'll try to explain the process in a nutshell. But usually, the very first starting point is we spend a lot of time trying to understand the client's questions and their challenge. And very much like academic research, the more you set the topic and the theme of your study more clearly, it helps you to build an analytical framework up front. So, if you want an understanding about, the notion of value for Spotify, for example, we had to do a lot of thinking in order to frame that brief. The brief from the client is, why are people not buying our monthly plan and only the weekly? And so the hypothesis that this has to do with people's relationship with value and money.
Yeah.
And so that's the very first thing, is getting your question right and not jumping straight into, like pricing and that kind of thing. And so that led to designing the whole research about understanding, seeing, experiencing how value is offered in different parts of life, and how people are consuming value in different categories. And so usually we then go into data collection, but then data collection, it really depends. So where does value live? It lives in the supermarket. It lives in people's everyday expenses. It lives in, many different things. And this would be the areas, if you remember, like the onion I was showing, we then plot out, where does value play out, from the private to the societal level. And then that's what we do to collect insights. And it's very similar to the work that we did with you, Raul, around understanding that femininity and gender roles, etc. But it's kind of the same process. We then collect all of that, and there's a process of synthesizing, analyzing through like inductive reasoning and many different kind of analytical tools. And that's pretty much it. And then we do a lot of work to really synthesize everything because there's a lot of complexity. And our role is to distill it. And we try to distill it as simply as possible, because then you want to, converge with a very simple insight, and you want to diverge again towards developing ideas and so forth.
Awesome. I think the simple answer is to just give you a call, or hire you.
Yeah, I'm hoping. Good.
Okay. The second topic is, it's around this topic, but not exactly about what you shared. And, the reason I'm asking you this question is also because of the fact that, while I've been involved with consumer research for different brands for such a long time, when I look back at my career, there are probably, a few people or a few agencies who have really made a mark on me, and they have left a mark on the brand, and they've changed the conversation. And in a lot of cases, it's been research for the sake of research. And my question, relates to, this larger industry challenge around conducting research in a proper way. And as a person who's providing that, who's doing rich work for the clients, right? But not everyone is able to see it and appreciate it when they are at the brief stage. When they are, it's when you give the solution, then they can realize. So I'm just trying to understand that, what are some of the core problems that you see around the way people conduct research, where it's more of a formality for the sake of doing research. And How do you go about convincing clients on the importance of doing it in a proper way? And what's been your experience in that space?
Okay, I'm gonna try not to badmouth my industry too much. But okay, so what are the challenges? I think often research comes out as rather stale and quite descriptive and not very useful. And I think a lot of the things that often clients come to us, usually they spend a lot of money on various studies that churn out similar themes and quite ambiguous themes that doesn't really inspire much. And so I think there's a couple of issues. The first is a misuse of methodology. I think there's an overuse of the focus group and those kind of methodologies. The focus group is great for exploring opinions and discussing ideas, but it's not great to know more things in depth. It's not great to understand tech culture or context. And it's not good. Sometimes groups are used for asking about behaviors. And you have to look at behaviors and observe them rather than asking people to recall. So it's really about being more demanding of the research agency to be more pointed in how you're going to extract certain types of insights from various different things. And secondly, my own experience is that, I mean, I've worked in multiple research agencies and I've done this for 18 years now. It's been an industry historically that's been obsessed with psychology. And it's all about understanding like the subconscious, and as if every kind of brand, product problem will be found in somebody's like inner subconscious. And I think that is true to some extent, but I think some of the most interesting insights is when you look outside of the subconscious and feelings. I mean, how much more do you need to hear that, that was the Diageo problem? How much more do you need to hear that people are driven by status or power or dominance or togetherness? What does it actually look like? I think that's the challenge.
Interesting. Awesome. So you can see a couple of questions on your screen as well. And I think someone wants to know where exactly you're based in Bali, but I think we'll avoid that for now. But I think there are two questions, one from Eliza and another from Isti. So if you want to take those questions, I'll pop them on the screen.
Sure. Whichever.
Okay, so let's start with Eliza's question. I think this is a quick one. Listening to the process behind, how long does it usually take to complete a project? I think this is also one of the challenges, that it shouldn't end up being a project that goes on forever. So how do you manage time as well when it comes to these projects?
I think this is an easy answer. Typically, our projects span between around 4 weeks to 8 weeks. And it really depends on the complexity and the scale of the project and how many kind of angles we need to look at and so forth. But about a month or 2 months is the typical length of a project.
Awesome. The next question is, thanks for the lovely talk. I agree. I have a question for Adri. With your project scope being typically wide and large with many data sets, how do you avoid data fatigue?
I'm not sure I understand data fatigue. I'm going to try to interpret. I guess I'm interpreting data fatigue as our team of researchers being overwhelmed by data. But I think that's our job is to distill complexity, and that's why we need about, often we ask for about 2 weeks to analyze and to build our report. The initial, as I said, it's important to set an analytical framework up front so you don't come out of fieldwork and data collection overwhelmed by everything. You've already planned all of this. You know exactly, all the elements that you need. And so when you start analyzing and synthesizing, you're not going with a complete blank sheet. So that's the first thing. And then obviously in our analysis, there are methods for us to kind of connect the dots between different elements and different lenses, and finding the connections between all of them.
Awesome. I think we are doing really good on the timing. We are at the 1 hour mark. And I think before we say thanks to everyone, there's someone who wants to know if you are willing to share the presentation slides. So if you are, you can say that now. If not, then that's completely fine, because there's like, your creds are there, and, details about the clients are also there. So it's up to you. But yeah, sorry, if you want to respond now.
Yeah, I think we might be able to share a version of it. I need to check things, but yeah, sure.
Awesome. So what I'll do is I'll provide a link, to the in the YouTube video in the description box. I'll provide a link once your presentation is ready to be downloaded, and we'll host it on, say, my website or your website or somewhere. So awesome. I think this was a really, really powerful session, as in, hearing about the quality of work that a particular person or an agency is doing, and seeing the process behind it, the methodology that you're employing, understanding that, and then seeing the power of its application in real client projects. I think that's where it all comes together, and you realize how important it is. So this was absolutely fascinating, and I think Kraft Heinz made the right decision to get you on board, and I think I made the absolutely right decision to have you here for the live stream. And thank you so much for sharing and this wonderful session. And yes, to anyone who's watching from, I don't know, last count was 30 countries. So, but anywhere around the world, wherever you're watching, thank you so much for taking the time. Adri, any parting message you want to leave?
No, I just want to thank you, Rahul, for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you next week.
Okay, see ya.